The sick rich man disguised himself as a janitor to check on his wife's parents, and discovered what foreigners are discussing with the notary. On a summer Saturday morning, the stationary clinic of the city hospital was engulfed in greenery and bathed in sunlight. Comfortable benches were arranged around the fountain, awaiting their visitors. A small lilac alley leading to the hospital gates was filled with birdsong and the rustle of sprawling tree crowns. Under one of those linden trees sat a slender young man with a pale face. He was engrossed in reading something on his tablet. From afar, one might have thought he was diligently working, despite being a patient of the hospital campus like the others. In reality, that was exactly the case. He was working. The man's name was Romeo, and at just under 30, he was the head of a major IT company. Romeo was a patient of the cardiology department and ended up here not by chance. Since childhood, he knew this would happen. Once, as a schoolboy, he overheard his mother talking to a friend. "Poor son. Will he be afflicted by this hereditary ailment passed down through his father's line?" "Rebecca, your husband died recently from heart problems," Mary gasped. "Exactly. It's hereditary in their family," Rebecca exclaimed tearfully. "God forbid you live to see your own child's light extinguished before your eyes." And Romeo's mother didn't live to see it. Rebecca died 5 years ago, drowned in a raging river while rafting with other tourists. That day, Mary called Romeo in the middle of the night. "Romeo, Rebecca's gone. The funeral's in 3 days." "It can't be," was all he could say then. His colleagues from the small company they were back then pooled their money and bought him a plane ticket. Romeo didn't believe his mother was dead all the way until he saw the casket. And it was as if the ground gave way beneath him. That's when Rachel, who worked where his mother did, supported him. She immediately liked the intelligent young man. Additionally, she was drawn to the circumstances she later told her friend about. "Romeo is so quiet, kind. I like that. And he's well off and stands firmly on his own 2 feet, and I won't have any mother-in-law to deal with. It's like marrying a rich orphan from an orphanage." "But how can you say that?" Rachel's friend was astonished by Rachel's calculating nature. "Why not? Isn't it true? Everyone's envious. Besides, Romeo is smitten with me. It's obvious. I'm beautiful, after all." Rachel was a smart girl. She knew well that Romeo achieved everything in life on his own. There was no one to help him. His father left early, his mother was poor, so the guy took on any job just to reach his goal, and he pursued it persistently, step by step, achieving success. Romeo was a computer whiz, so he gathered around him equally talented enthusiasts capable of turning something small into something great. Soon Romeo's team got lucky and won an international programming contest. "Congratulations, young man," said the corporation's CEO, shaking Romeo's hand. "Now all doors are open to you, and our multi-million grant will help bring your idea to life." "Thank you." Romeo was ecstatic. Dreams do come true. Now he knew for sure. A year after his mom passed away, Romeo and Rachel got married. Rachel insisted on having a lavish wedding. "Stacy will be green with envy," Rachel boasted to her friend, trying on her luxurious wedding dress and expensive necklace. "I'll invite her just to show off. Let her see what a wonderful life I'll have with a wealthy husband." Though the celebration was grand, it lacked genuine joy. Romeo's invited colleagues found the bride arrogant and unkind, so they didn't linger at the wedding for long. "She's not the right match for him," remarked Harvey, Romeo's deputy. "Look at her, all preening and swaggering. Our Romeo is nothing like that, always humble and respectful to everyone. And this Rachel, she's just all show." "You'll see, he'll regret it," said Mrs. Wheeler, the wise and mature secretary. "Ill-mannered, uneducated. You can tell right away, people like her never let go of their prey. She'll bleed him dry." Mrs. Wheeler was right. Just 2 years later, Romeo didn't know where to turn from his quarrelsome and greedy wife. Despite being well off, she begrudged every penny, refusing to help Romeo's friends while splurging on herself lavishly. Expensive salons, designer clothes, and parties at exclusive clubs, that's all Rachel cared about. Soon their home saw fewer and fewer visits from friends and colleagues, and Romeo felt like a fifth wheel with his wife, utterly unnecessary, and it wore him down. That's when he started feeling something was wrong with his health. His heart had its first glitch. He was rushed to the hospital. His wife visited only once. How can this be? Rachel said indignantly, instead of supporting her sick husband. We were supposed to go to Paris this week. It means I won't get to see the Eiffel Tower and attend Fashion Week. You know, I'm so upset, I feel sick. Well, go alone. I'll give you money. You can take a friend with you. Rachel, by the way, are you accidentally pregnant? Romeo asked hopefully. It would be great if we had a baby. No, I'm not pregnant, she said, pursing her lips. I can't get pregnant by you, you know that. My tests are fine, and the doctor said it's not me. You're infertile, Romeo. Sorry, Rachel. So, we won't have our own, he shrugged. But we can always adopt a baby from an orphanage. What do you say? No way. Rachel exclaimed. I'm not bringing some druggy's kid into our home. No, better no kids at all than that. Their conversation ended there, and Rachel left, her heels clicking loudly. She flew off to Paris and demanded a divorce from Romeo, citing their lack of children as his fault. This hit Romeo hard emotionally. The last time he saw her was in court. His wife arrived with a tall, muscular beau, presenting him as her suitor. Romeo and Rachel divorced, and he was single again. Friends and colleagues, who had supported him throughout, threw a party for him. Congratulations on your liberation and escape from the clutches of the cunning seductress with minimal losses. Hooray, comrades! Harvey exclaimed joyfully. We are very glad to have you back with us. And there are plenty more fish in the sea. After the party, Romeo felt unwell again. An ambulance had to be called. You really don't take care of yourself, my friend, the attending doctor, Mr. Lawrence, shook his head. I told you, you need to avoid stress and physical exertion. Tell me, what have you been doing? I bet you overdid it in the gym or went skydiving. I got divorced, Romeo replied thoughtfully. And it wasn't easy. The doctor sympathetically patted his shoulder, sighed, and continued his examination. You'll have to stay here, Mr. Lawrence frowned. I'll prescribe conservative treatment for you, but surgery may be necessary soon, otherwise you won't make it to 40, unfortunately. Your heart is currently functioning like that of an 80-year-old man. Yes, some parts of your engine need replacement, so to speak. Is it dangerous? Romeo asked, alarmed. Well, no more dangerous than living with such a worn-out heart, young man, the doctor said, looking sympathetically into his eyes. But there are undoubtedly risks. Firstly, anesthesia. Nobody knows how your heart and brain will react to such stress. Besides, everyone's bodies are different, and what will happen after the surgery is truly unknown. No one cancels complications, but how you'll handle them specifically, no one can guarantee, he continued. Sometimes even the surgeon's hand may tremble, or a nerve or artery may be nicked. In general, my prognosis is 50-50. And that's not bad. What do you mean, 50-50? Romeo repeated. I thought you'd give at least 80%. No, I think I'll hold off on the operation for now. That's the problem, you don't have much time, Mr. Lawrence sighed. If you decide otherwise, let me know. And the doctor left, carefully closing the door behind him. And now Romeo sat on a bench under a linden tree, watching the patients of the hospital town go out for a morning stroll after breakfast. Most of them took their places near the fountain, which spouted cool streams of water. The patients smiled. Many of them were getting better. All except Romeo. Now time was working against him. Romeo sent another directive to his work email and leaned back against the bench. He felt weak, dizzy. "Are you feeling unwell?" Julia, a young nurse, asked. "You skipped breakfast. Seems like that's why you have no energy. Let's go to the canteen. I'll ask them to set a table for you. You need to eat." "I don't have much of an appetite. I don't want to," Romeo replied sleepily. "You're going to, whether you want to or not," the nurse said stubbornly. "What's your name?" Romeo asked, looking with interest at the person who was so forcefully making him eat. The last time someone did that was his mother, back when Romeo was still in school. "Julia," she replied, blushing. "I'm almost done with my nursing degree, and I took this job to earn some money. Just need to pass the exams." "Congratulations," Romeo smiled. "It's a good profession. My name is Romeo. I've never been good at humanities, so I'm an engineer." He deliberately avoided revealing his true identity. He feared that another Rachel would seek a lavish lifestyle at his expense, while he would be of no use to her. It's the eternal problem of wealthy bachelors. To his surprise, Julia paid no attention to information about his job, focusing only on his name. She smiled and laughed. "What's so funny?" Romeo didn't understand. "Have you read Shakespeare?" Julia quipped. "Well, yes, I have." "So what?" Romeo puzzled, suddenly realizing that the girl might be a bit dense. "And hence Romeo and Juliet," she persisted. And then it dawned on Romeo what amused his companion. He smiled. "Indeed, a coincidence. You're very attentive to details. That's great, especially for your profession. And let's switch to you since we're at it. So, where, you say, is my breakfast?" To his surprise, Julia paid no attention to information about his job. "And let's switch to you. So, where, you say, is my breakfast?" And they went to the cafeteria, lively discussing their favorite literature. Romeo felt how easy it was with Julia. Even his heart stopped pounding nervously and settled down. 2 weeks later, he returned to work, where he was long awaited. The team was delighted and started pouring out ideas for promoting the new product they had created. It seemed that Romeo's bachelor life had fallen into place and flowed smoothly. The company's 5th anniversary was approaching, which they decided to celebrate in style by booking several tables at an expensive restaurant. Toasts and congratulations poured from all sides, but Romeo didn't drink alcohol, remembering the doctor's words. To stretch his legs a bit, he stepped away from the table and settled at the bar. "I'll have a non-alcoholic mojito, please," he told the bartender. "Why aren't you drinking?" "Your cheerful company is really hitting it off," remarked the bartender. Next to Romeo sat an attractive brunette who was eyeing him intently. "My doctor forbade it," Romeo replied honestly and continued to watch his colleagues enjoying themselves. "Wow. And I just don't drink on principle, it's become a habit," the stranger continued the conversation. "Good habit," Romeo approved. "I don't know any woman who doesn't drink alcohol at all, or at least cocktails. I think every man dreams of such a wife." "Well, then marry me." "What's the problem?" the woman laughed. "Although, first we need to get acquainted. My name is Christina. I work in a bank and live in Berlin. And I'm Romeo. My colleagues and I work in the same IT company. I recently got divorced, so I'm quite comfortable with bachelor life at the moment. So I'm not planning to get married anytime soon, even to such a beauty from abroad like you. By the way, you speak English excellently. I did an internship here for a long time, so I improved my language skills. Besides, I've been studying the local culture since childhood, even took extra lessons at school. And marriage is not obligatory," Christina laughed. "People can live perfectly well without a stamp in their passport. No one owes anything to anyone, and that's right, in my opinion. Bartender, the same for me as for the young man." Romeo liked the girl, especially her frankness and independence. She didn't let him pay for her, which was unusual and maybe a little pleasant. His heart skipped a beat, sensing the approach of infatuation. That same evening, Romeo jokingly introduced Christina to his friends and colleagues as his fiancée. But they say there's a grain of truth in every joke, and soon they started living together in Romeo's house. A month later, he proposed to Christina. Unlike Rachel, his first wife, the bride was caring and understanding. With Christina, he felt comfortable, and friends started visiting their home again, organizing evening gatherings with barbecue and board games. Just a month later, Christina and Romeo got married. The wedding was modest, barely noticeable to the town, just as Christina wanted. Lucky you with your wife, envy the single colleagues. How did you manage to snatch her, huh? She came to me herself, Romeo laughed, hardly believing his luck. Once, when his illness reminded him of its presence, he told Christina about his health problem and decided to consult about surgery. Well, it's up to you to decide, she shrugged. After all, surgery doesn't guarantee a 100% cure. What if you end up disabled or worse, dead, afterward? Think it over carefully. Doubts crept into Romeo's hesitant soul. He decided to temporarily stop thinking about the surgery until he had a third seizure. The emergency barely managed to get him to cardiology, where the fading Romeo was met by Mr. Lawrence. The experienced doctor quickly revived him, admitting him to the intensive care unit for a couple of days. He mustn't be distressed, Mr. Lawrence told Christina. No bad news or arguments. Surround him only with warmth and love. Care has never harmed anyone in this life. Okay, promised Christina, lost in thought. She visited her husband in the hospital every day but didn't stay long, citing business. Don't be upset, Romeo, I have to go, said Christina, bidding farewell. Investors need to be called. Besides, my parents will soon arrive from Germany to meet you. We need to find them a guide translator, arrange accommodation in a hotel. In short, there's plenty to do. You know it yourself, being the head of a prestigious company. I'm not upset at all, reassured Romeo. Do what you need to do. Work is work. My first wife never worked a day, but the second one is a workaholic. Seems like there's no middle ground. They laughed, and Julia, who was passing by, involuntarily admired their family idol. Somewhere deep down, she envied Christina and at the same time rejoiced for the kind-hearted Romeo. The next day, he woke up to someone's intense gaze, opened his eyes, and saw two elderly people in front of him, a man and a woman. Guten Morgen, the woman said in a creaky voice and forced a smile, her eyes coldly gleaming. Hello, Romeo responded, surprised. He realized they greeted him in German. Meanwhile, the man slowly shook Romeo's hand, then held it for a long time, leisurely releasing his surprisingly firm fingers. Romeo felt like the man discreetly checked his pulse, but he quickly dismissed the idea, attributing it to the consequences of his illness. The man whispered something to Christina, who was standing nearby, and she translated. Meet my parents, Bertha and Thomas Schwartz. Dad said he's very glad to see you in good health, and Mom asked to tell you to recover soon. Please convey my gratitude for their concern, said Romeo. Unfortunately, I don't speak German, but perhaps I'll try to learn. Christina turned to her parents and whispered her fiancé's words to them. The elderly couple smiled and nodded, and then the bride's mother pulled out a small packet of food from her bag and placed it on the bedside table, gesturing that it should be eaten quickly. Romeo was pleased that he was being taken care of by a whole family. It's great to be the son-in-law of good people, he thought. Unlike Rachel's parents, who only cared about my money. Well, it's time for us to go, said Christina. We need to get them settled in the hotel. They're tired from the flight, coming straight to visit you from the airport. Then let them stay in our house, Romeo suggested. We have plenty of room, a cook, a maid. They won't need anything. After all, I won't be leaving here anytime soon. That's not how we do things, Christina smiled, but I'll convey your wish to them. Let them rejoice in what a generous son-in-law they have. Christina kissed Romeo on the cheek and left with her parents. The next day she didn't show up, just sent a message saying she was very busy, and the day after that she didn't show up either. Her phone was not answering. But Rachel's parents visited Romeo every day, which, to be honest, made him uncomfortable. But Romeo endured, reminding himself they were his relatives. When they left, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Romeo's heart began to ache from the stress, and his overall condition worsened. This was immediately noticed by Julia, who often came to his private room. "You don't look well, the hero of my poem." "Tired?" Julia asked cheerfully. "Yeah, a bit," Romeo admitted. "You see, this foreign delegation comes to me every day, as if they have nothing better to do." "Well, what can you do? They're Christina's parents. Maybe that's why your relatives come to Mr. Lawrence's office every day to talk." "They're worried about you," Julia remarked. "How can they talk? They only communicate with me through Christina, and without her, they gesture with their hands. And they certainly don't understand complex medical terms in English," Romeo marveled. "I don't know what they discuss because they always close the door behind them." Julia shrugged and left the room, leaving him in disarray. Romeo couldn't digest the information he received for a long time, so he decided to seek help from Mr. Lawrence, but as luck would have it, he was either in surgery or had gone home to rest. The next morning, Romeo couldn't wait for his wife to come. When she appeared, she greeted him too coldly and was already getting ready to leave after 5 minutes. "Why are you leaving so quickly? We barely saw each other for 3 days, Romeo lamented. "Stay a little longer. And by the way, I have a question for you. Do your parents speak any English at all?" "No," she replied dryly. "I'll come tomorrow, stay longer, but I really need to hurry now." "Sorry, darling." At the word darling, Romeo felt uneasy. Rachel used to call him that. Seeing her husband frozen with hurt, Christina softened. "Hang in there, Romeo, everything will be fine soon. And now, lie down and rest, gather strength. See you tomorrow." And Christina left, leaving the scent of her perfume in the room. The sun mercilessly beat through the windows, and Romeo opened the shutters to let in some fresh air. But then he saw, trying to remain unnoticed under the trees outside the hospital, Christina's parents talking animatedly with a distinguished-looking man. Interesting, Romeo thought, maybe that's their new translator? And what are they discussing so fervently? But then individual words in English reached his ear. It confused him. Did they really know English? Then why hide it? What was the point? Something inside him urged him to go and figure out this confusing situation that was disrupting his ability to eat and sleep peacefully. His soul demanded truth, and Romeo decided to follow his hunches, but he needed help. "Julia, help me," he gasped, grabbing her hand. "I need your clothes." "What?" she exclaimed. "Are you out of your mind?" No, Romeo waved his hand and realized he had blurted out nonsense. "I need a uniform and a medical mask like yours." "No time to explain. Will you help?" Julia nodded silently and led him to the utility room. Quickly finding the right size, she gave him a sanitary gown and pants. Without wasting a moment, Romeo dressed in the medical attire and hurried to leave, while Julia stayed behind, waiting. Romeo's behavior worried her, but she still trusted him. Drawing closer to the peacefully conversing trio, he positioned himself nearby and could hear every word. "So you guarantee a positive outcome?" Bertha asked the stranger in perfect English. "Well, it depends," the man replied. "It all depends on him. If he doesn't want to, he won't create or sign anything, but if he does. But you're the best notary we were recommended. We hoped you would arrange everything so that the estate goes entirely to Christina after his death." "I never promised to arrange anything for you, only provided recommendations and drafted a sample will," the notary answered. "For which we paid a fortune," Bertha exclaimed angrily. "Also, don't forget I agreed to keep silent about your scheme," the notary reminded. "As they say, silence is golden. Here are your documents. Call me as soon as the client is ready, but for now, excuse me, I have an appointment. This means, Romeo thought, am I that very object? Are they trying to pull a wool in favor of Christina from me? What blasphemy! Burying someone prematurely and extorting all his money through deceit. What scoundrels! Wait, they speak English, and they're definitely not Germans. And maybe Christina isn't even Christina. Yes, she lured me into the bar, knowing in advance who I am. Caught like a foolish carp. Romeo was furious. He returned to his room, removed the gown and mask, and immersed himself in thought. Julia came in to collect the items, stopping when she realized he was in the midst of some internal struggle. But she didn't intervene, quietly leaving the room. From his heavy thoughts, Romeo deliberately pulled out the lively voice of his wife. And here I am. Missed me? Look who came with me, she said, pointing to the artificially smiling father and mother. What's wrong with you? Are you feeling worse? Bertha and Thomas exchanged meaningful glances. Romeo didn't miss this. Just a day ago, he wouldn't have thought anything of it, but now, after seeing and hearing what he did, everything changed. What, are they playing dirty tricks on me? Well, let them blame themselves, they'll get what's coming to them, he thought, but aloud he said, yeah, feeling pretty awful today. Don't even have the energy to get out of bed to eat. Seems like I'm getting worse, and my end is near. Bertha and Thomas quietly exchanged words, and Tarabarsky, addressing Christina. Don't talk like that. Dad thinks everything will be fine, Christina said, her eyes shining with joy. We just need to cover our bases. How so? Romeo pretended not to understand anything. They say you need to make a will in advance for the most important person to you. Christina smiled and sat next to him, stroking his head. Otherwise, everything will go to the state. You don't want that, do you? And what should I do? Who should I leave my assets and money in the accounts to? Romeo asked, already knowing the answer. Well, for example, to the one who loves you so much, Christina said sweetly, hugging Romeo. Right, I can just leave everything to you, he theatrically slapped his forehead. How fortunate you advised me of this. That's what I'll do, but I don't have a pen or paper. I happen to have writing supplies and documents with me, Christina said, taking a portfolio from Thomas. I was working on reports recently, so I still have some things. You know I always carry work with me. You've even seen it yourself. I haven't had time to visit you constantly. And I'll send you a sample wool to your email tonight. All right. You're so caring. Romeo forced a smile, mentally cursing the day he went to that bar. Bertha handed him a pen and several sheets of paper. Tomorrow I'll come with a notary, and he'll authenticate your signature, Christina said. Her eyes sparkled with happiness. I really want you to get better, but this will make everyone feel more at ease. Let's just consider it me helping you out, covering for you. Yeah, you're very thoughtful, Romeo remarked. When the satisfied trio left, he tore up the paper and threw the pen into the trash. He didn't want to touch things given to him by traitors and deceivers. Julia came by and found him in a terrible mood. Why are you so down? Well, how can they be so petty? Tell me, huh? I'm still alive, and they're squeezing money out of me like from a dusty rug. Romeo couldn't find peace. Well, people are different, Julia noted. My parents abandoned me altogether. I grew up in an orphanage. So money is nonsense. Didn't think you were rich. Doesn't it look like it? Romeo smiled, feeling a bit lighter inside. No, Julia laughed. Thought all rich folks are stuck up and only eat various oysters and strange sea creatures. And you're just having porridge with potatoes. Romeo finally cheered up from the offense. Feeling hungry. Wasn't breakfast announced? And they, chatting happily, headed to the dining room, where the delicious smell of cheesecake wafted through the air. Romeo now knew what he had to do. After lunch, Mr. Bailey, his personal lawyer and notary, came to his room. He had been like a grandfather to Romeo, caring for him paternalistically. "Romeo, summoned?" "What's the matter?" the guest asked, concerned. "Well, I want to make a will," the young man simply replied. Mr. Bailey clutched his heart. "Is it really that bad? Is there no hope at all? My boy, how did this happen?" "Oh no, I'm not dying, although my wife would very much like it," Romeo frowned. "Let me draft a temporary will. It can be rewritten according to my new wishes later, right?" "Well, of course." "Then let's get a pen and a piece of paper." And Romeo wrote his first will in his life. It wasn't easy for him. Not every young person has to contemplate death to such an extent. "Here, take it and notarize it," Romeo handed over the document. When Mr. Bailey read the will, his eyes widened. "Are you sure, buddy?" "More than sure," said Romeo. "And also, I have a request for you. From now on, 1% of my company's income will be allocated to the city shelter. Prepare the order and hand it over to the financiers." "It will be done," said Mr. Bailey. "I myself have long wanted to get involved in charity." When the notary left, Romeo was left alone and contemplated his life. How did he allow people like Rachel and Christina into it? If bad people cling to you, it means something needs to change, Romeo thought. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Christina, Bertha, and Thomas entered the room, filled with hope. Behind them squeezed the same notary whom he had seen on the street. "How are you doing?" began the wife from afar. "Did you write a will?" "Huh?" Romeo nodded. "My notary notarized it and took it away." "Why bother yourself?" Christina said in a sarcastic tone. "We brought a notary with us." "And what's in that will, if it's not a secret?" "Of course it's not a secret," Romeo smiled. "Everything I have, after my death, I leave to the orphanage in our city. A trustee will be appointed to manage these funds, and I'll distribute the company among my employees. This way, they'll have an incentive to improve and prosper it further. Thanks for suggesting the will. Now I'm relieved." "What about me?" Christina's nostrils flared with anger. "I haven't forgotten about you. I bequeathed aquarium fish to you. You used to admire them. And you'll earn money on your own. Christina, you're so busy with your company, but support will be useful to the orphans. When they leave the orphanage, they'll receive good financial support until they stand on their own feet. Since you're an independent, well-off woman, as you yourself said, I didn't dare to offend you with my gift." "How could you?" she exclaimed. "Don't I mean anything to you? Are those petty beggars more important to you?" "Christina, I've wasted my time on you," suddenly shouted his mother in perfect English. "Idiot," echoed Thomas, waving his hands. "How can you squander your wealth like this? It's better to rewrite the will and give all the money to our girl. She's your wife. She'll know how to handle it. And your fund will be picked apart." "Who will pick it apart? Such swindlers as you?" Romeo asked. "By the way, congratulations on mastering the language. Or are you not foreigners, Gentleman Schuler? Got your tongues tied? Surprised? Yes, I know everything, so you better leave before you end up in jail. You have nothing on us." Bertha spat, spluttering. "Ah, how eloquently said, Bertha, or what's your real name?" Romeo inquired. "And if my lawyers dig deeper and find out that you're not Bertha and Christina isn't your daughter, I wonder how much you'll get for fraud." His words threw the trio into confusion. Bertha stomped her foot and stormed out of the room, followed by Thomas and Christina, who shot Romeo an angry glance. He was alone again. It felt like a weight had lifted off his soul, glad that he hadn't been fooled by some imposters. As for Christina, he realized he didn't love her as much as he thought he did. It all felt like some kind of illusion. Luckily, she hadn't shown up at the hospital anymore, and 2 days later Mr. Bailey brought documents for signing. Christina had filed for divorce. After clarifying the situation, the lawyer said, she simply realized she had nothing to gain, so she decided to run off. She'll find another sugar daddy. Mr. Bailey, I have a big favor to ask of you. Find out as much as you can about this trio. I don't think they'll just let me be. We need to be prepared for anything, Romeo asked the lawyer. He always thought strategically, it was his talent. The next morning, Mr. Lawrence arrived and announced that the tests had confirmed his words. Romeo urgently needed surgery. It will be complex, but I have the strength and ability to make it successful. I can't guarantee it will be easy, but I advise you to agree, the doctor said. I'm ready. Do whatever you need to, but put me back on my feet, Romeo said. I have no strength left to be a feeble old man at 29. The doctor nodded and left. Julia, upon learning that her friend was facing a difficult operation, supported him as best she could, literally surrounding him with care. I believe everything will go well, she said. I heard about your divorce from those fraudsters. They seemed odd to everyone, so you didn't lose anything, and most importantly now is your health. Romeo smiled. He had grown so accustomed to Julia that he only now realized how kind she was to him and, in her own way, beautiful. She lacked the things he disliked in people: greed, malice, betrayal. And he realized he was truly, deeply in love. This feeling gave him strength. The next day, they performed the surgery, which went more than successfully. The doctors performed a real feat, spending 17 hours straight at the operating table. Julia was there when Romeo was taken from the operating room to the ICU, and she was there when he was transferred to the ward. She didn't leave his side because she had been in love with him for a long time, irrevocably. She had lost weight and grown thin, worrying about Romeo and forsaking sleep for him. It seemed her feelings had conquered illness. Romeo quickly began to recover. The whole hospital watched with bated breath. And then this story went beyond the hospital walls and started wandering through the city. When Romeo was allowed to get up and receive visitors, the lawyer came to his room with news. You won't believe what I found out, Mr. Bailey said, practically trembling with excitement to tell his boss. Listen, this Christina isn't Christina at all, she's Karen. She was an orphan, but at the age of 10, she was adopted by a couple named Sarah and Howard Connors. Yeah, those same Bertha and Thomas. So, the girl initially worked for them, begging at train stations. She pretended to be a gypsy and told fortunes. In short, they taught her all the tricks of thievery and the art of financial scams. They worked together seamlessly, amassed a good fortune from it, and always came out unscathed. You're lucky you caught on in time and didn't give away all your assets to her. Legally, you don't owe her anything since you earned the main property and fortune before marriage. Wow, exclaimed Romeo. I had a feeling something was off, and the incident helped me understand better. Let's just say I got really lucky. There's still the court to deal with, the lawyer warned. Christina will demand money from you during the divorce process, but I'll be there, so don't worry. In a few more days, he was discharged. They said goodbye to Julia, but agreed to keep in touch. However, they needed to finalize their divorce first. The courtroom was heated with the impudence of once modest Christina. Your Honor, she addressed the judge, I demand that my husband give me half of his assets. Are you willing to share your income with your wife after the divorce? The judge asked Romeo. No, he replied firmly. First, let her reveal her true name. She deceived me. When Christina realized she had been exposed so quickly, she assessed the degree of danger she faced legally, so she quietly said, Your Honor, I withdraw my claims. I've changed my mind. Thus, the trio of fraudsters found themselves at a loss for the first time, and Romeo hurried to Julia. He got her address from the hospital. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. Romeo was surprised that people could live in such a rundown place. He knocked on the door. When Julia opened it and saw him with a luxurious bouquet, she was momentarily speechless. Hi, Romeo smiled, here I am. Sorry for the sudden visit. We never exchanged phone numbers, after all. I didn't expect to see you, Julia admitted. Come in, I'll make us some tea. And thank you for the flowers. No one has ever given me such ones. I don't even have a vase. I'll have to put them in a regular jar. And I just baked a pie. You're just in time." While Julia bustled in the small kitchen, Romeo looked around. There were only 2 rooms in the house, one of them very tiny. He entered and saw a crib. A 4-year-old boy slept in it. "This is my son and my pain," Julia said quietly. "You never told me you had a child," Romeo said. "He looks so much like you, it's uncanny." "Yes, I was married, but he left me for another woman when George was just a year old. We got divorced. George was born with developmental delays. He's clever, understands everything, and can even write letters, but he can't speak. I've taken him to doctors, but they all say they can't help. He needs an expensive examination. I don't have that kind of money." "Well, I do. I'll pay for it," Romeo said. "Oh, come on, that's not necessary. Don't think it's because of them that I'm talking to you. I just liked you, that's all," Julia confessed. "And I like you too," Romeo smiled. "It's not a bother. Let's wait until George wakes up, and then we'll go to my place, and don't argue." She chuckled nervously. Medical examinations showed that George's condition wasn't as dire as initially thought. Properly prescribed medications and the assistance of a qualified specialist would make a difference. They just needed to find a good doctor, but nothing is impossible for determined people. Soon, a young doctor named Ashley was invited to Romeo's house. From the very first day, Ashley had George wrapped around her finger, following her around like a little puppy. They had sessions every day to expedite the effect. But the longer Ashley stayed in the house, the less interested she became in the little patient. She set her sights on the homeowner and actively sought his attention. Moreover, the doctor herself was attractive and knew it. "George, let's take a break," Ashley chirped. "Go to Mommy, and I'll go grab some water." The trusting child ran upstairs, while Ashley headed to the terrace, where Romeo liked to hang out. "What lovely weather we're having today," she began. "And I dressed so warmly." "Yes, the weather is great," Romeo agreed. "How's George doing?" "Everything's fine," Ashley replied shortly and continued to flirt with him. "Could you help me unfasten the button on my blouse? Something's caught on it from behind." He stood up and kindly started helping. He respected the doctor and wanted to please her for George's sake. "There, all done," said Romeo. "Thank you," giggled Ashley. "What would I do without you?" "Oh," Ashley pretended to stumble and began to fall right into him. Romeo, like a true gentleman, caught her in his arms. Ashley took advantage of the moment, hugging him around the neck, pressing her whole body against his. Julia witnessed this scene, stunned by what she saw. If she had been on the terrace from the beginning of their conversation, she would have surely deciphered the doctor's intentions, but now, recalling her husband's escapades, Julia was furious. Hurt and jealousy surged within her, but she pretended as if nothing had happened. "My son is rested, you can continue," she said dryly, giving Ashley a furious look. This was what the doctor aimed for. Her poisonous arrow hit the mark. In the following days, Ashley did everything to annoy and offend Julia's tender soul, while Romeo didn't notice the traps skillfully set by the cunning doctor. One fine day, when Romeo returned from a long business trip, he found neither George nor Julia at home. There was only a note on the table: "Don't look for us. You chose Ashley, so I won't stand in the way of your happiness." "What on earth is this?" exclaimed Romeo. It turned out that trouble came from an unexpected direction. When Ashley rang the doorbell the next day, he opened it, immediately handed her an envelope with money for the sessions, and said, "You're fired. We no longer require your services. And here's my advice: don't disgrace honest doctors with your actions." Before Ashley could say anything in response, the door slammed shut in her face. Julia's house was locked with a padlock. Romeo went to the hospital to ask her colleagues. "Maybe she went to the village," suggested one of the nurses. "We once went there with her to visit her grandfather." He passed away, and Julia inherited the house. Look for her there, she has nowhere else to go. Romeo immediately went to the village, thankfully not far away. At the administration office, they confirmed that Julia Rogers indeed lived there with her son and had recently been hired as a paramedic, which they were thrilled about, as the village lacked medical personnel. Her grandfather's house stood near the forest and was surrounded by a garden. It was already evening when Romeo found his beloved working in the yard. George was playing nearby with his mother. The guest felt the engagement ring box in his pocket, giving him courage. In his hand, he held a bouquet of flowers expertly arranged in the shape of a heart by the city's best florist. "Dad," suddenly shouted George. "Dad!" Julia's basket slipped from her hands in surprise, and Romeo stopped and froze, as if afraid to scare away the unexpected happiness. George started talking. He ran towards Romeo with wide-open arms. Romeo embraced the boy and buried his face in his curly hair. "You smell so delicious, like apples, son," Romeo said. Julia, upon hearing those words, burst into tears. She was overwhelmed with emotions. Her little one finally spoke, and her beloved man came to her and acknowledged the boy as his own. "Mama, don't cry," exclaimed George. "Dad has come to us." Julia approached her two dearest people and hugged them tightly. The village neighbors poured out to see this scene. Such passions hadn't been seen here for a long time. "Will you marry me?" Romeo asked directly. "Yes," she said softly. "Please, trust no one but me," he said sternly. "There are plenty of people in the world who envy others' happiness. We shouldn't heed them. Let's go inside. People are staring at us like it's an Indian movie," Julia laughed. "Let them stare." Over dinner, they shared their experiences and rejoiced that everything had been resolved. "You had the wisdom to come to me," Julia smiled. "And here I am, a foolish woman, allowing my fragile happiness to be destroyed by the first passerby. Can you imagine, the local farmer proposed to me recently, but I refused because I still loved you. And that womanizer and drunkard was repulsive to even look at. So shameless, I could barely get him to leave." "Yeah, let him try anything," Romeo said. "George and I will kick him out." "Right, son?" "Yeah, and I have a wooden sword, I'll protect Mom," George chimed in. Everyone laughed and continued to enjoy the raspberry pies. Julia had a real talent for cooking. Romeo spent a week in their rural cottage. The nature and open-hearted people inspired him with an idea. "You know, I'd like to settle down here," Romeo confessed. "What if we become farmers too? We could buy that alcoholics farm and live and work here. Besides, jobs for locals, and the market for me wouldn't be a problem. The city folks are craving quality products. What do you say?" "Really?" she exclaimed. "I really like it here, and I don't want to go back to the city at all. I'd be happy to stay here. And George is doing so well here, look at those cheeks he's filled out. Then it's settled. I'll go to the city to sell the company, and you stay here. Wait for me with good news. Everything will be fine." The local farmer agreed to the sale, proposing a hefty sum, but it wasn't an insurmountable price for Romeo, so he signed the contract. The only thing left was to sell his business profitably to a good person who wouldn't dismiss the established team. For this, Romeo was willing to negotiate the price. One day, while Romeo was going through the company's documentation in his office, a heated lawyer stormed in. "Have you seen who's come forward as a buyer for your company?" "Not yet," Romeo replied. "I didn't expect someone to react so quickly." "Who is it?" "It's Christina and her strange clan of relatives." "I nearly fell off my chair," Mr. Bailey exclaimed. "Don't you dare sell to her. I swear, I'll curse her." "Are you out of your mind?" "Of course not. But I wonder, where did she get all that money?" Romeo pondered. "Listen, connect me with our head of security. Let him dig into who she is and report back." The lawyer left, but the thought of another scheme by Christina troubled Romeo. Whom had the cunning beast tricked this time? Towards the end of the workday, the head of security dropped by. From his satisfied expression, Romeo could tell he had news. "Your ex-wife managed to marry and become a widow," he blurted out. "They say her husband was into mountaineering and fell off a cliff into a ravine. Eyewitnesses confirmed his death. Retrieving the body was impossible, so Christina is now a wealthy widow with riches beyond imagination. I think this might be her next scheme. And perhaps she's responsible for her husband's death," Romeo concluded. "Seems like she decided to launder money and buy our company, knowing its turnovers and prospects. Perhaps it's worth paying a visit to the police, and in the meantime, find out her address." The investigator shrugged. "Well, what can I tell you? No body, no case," he said. "If everyone points fingers at someone and calls them a scammer, there won't be enough prisons for all. But thanks for being vigilant, comrade. Now, go on, don't disturb our work. We've got real criminals to deal with here." Romeo understood. Arguing with a tired policeman without solid evidence was pointless, so he decided to double-check everything himself. After obtaining Christina's address, he decided to tail the fraudster. He had to wait in his car for a long time, parked at a distance from the house where Christina lived with her parents. When it got dark, a car cautiously emerged from the mansion's garage, with Christina behind the wheel. After waiting a few moments, he followed. They reached the outskirts of the city, where a semi-destroyed shack stood on a vacant lot. Christina got out of the car and looked around, checking if anyone was following her. Romeo had hidden his car securely in the bushes, so she didn't notice him in the darkness. Trembling with excitement, Romeo took out his car flashlight and activated the recording on his phone. He stealthily followed Christina into the building. "So, he's not dead yet, you idiot?" Christina didn't mince words. In the dim light, someone mumbled in response. Romeo decided to act. He illuminated the entire room with a powerful beam from the flashlight. On the floor, tied up by hands and feet with a gag in his mouth, sat a frail and feeble-looking man. Christina stood over him, holding a bat, ready to strike. Beside her was a canister of gasoline. Evidently, she intended to kill the poor man and set fire to the place. "I'm just in time, aren't I?" exclaimed Romeo, recording everything on the camera, which immediately streamed the footage online. "So, you decided to kill this man? Who are you, Christina?" She pounced on him with the growl of a wild cat, but Romeo swiftly immobilized her with a quick hand motion. Tying her up, Romeo rushed to the stranger and set him free. "Are you this monster's husband? Hang in there, everything will be all right." He nodded and cried. The man was around 60, but he looked even older from malnutrition and being kept in inhumane conditions. The police, called to the scene, arrested Christina and then her accomplices. They were each sentenced to 10 years in prison, and their marriage was declared invalid. After the trial, Christina's former husband, the millionaire Mr. Moore, who had finally regained his senses, approached Romeo. "Thank you, son. You know, I have no family, no children. Can I visit you sometimes? I'd like to become your father, if you'll allow it. Thank you for calling me son. I haven't heard those words in a long time, but I'll never refuse a real father. You know what? Let's go to the village. I have a fiancé there, with George. We're getting married in a week. You can relax in the countryside, gather strength. I invite you." "With pleasure." Mr. Moore was happy. Romeo and Julia's wedding was magnificent. The whole village celebrated. Everyone congratulated the newlyweds and gave gifts. Finally, Mr. Moore took the floor. "Julia, Romeo, I'm glad to be a part of your family. You accepted me as a father, and I've prepared a special gift for you. I'm giving you the farm you've been dreaming of. Own it and bring goodness to people. Cheers." The newlyweds froze in surprise, then applauded. Everyone raised their glasses to the new, happy life of the couple. Only Julia didn't drink. "And why not?" Romeo asked. "I bought the best champagne. Because, she laughed. Someone insisted he was childless, and it turns out I've had a belly dweller settling in for 3 weeks already. And here I was wondering what was going on. Got scared, went to the doctor. And there you have it, a childless daddy. What? I'm going to be a father? Wow. George, hearing the news, was also beside himself with joy.